My name is Loretta Me Childers. I am 36 years old. And the morning my parents sat me down at my grandmother's kitchen table and slid a piece of paper toward me with a pen already uncapped, they had not read past page 4 of a 14-page document. They thought they knew everything that was in it. They had been talking about it for 11 months, ever since the funeral, parceling out my grandmother's things in their heads like it was already done. They had the confidence of people who had never been wrong about anything that mattered, or at least had never been told so to their face. And they sat there across from me, my mother with her hands folded the way she folds them when she is waiting for you to agree with her, and my father looking out the window at the pecan trees like the matter was already settled, like I was just a signature he had not collected yet. I looked at the paper, I looked at the pen, I did not pick it up. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is where we share real-life inspired tales of family conflict, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground. If these stories speak to you, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I need to tell you about my grandmother first, because none of this makes sense without her. It never does in stories like this. The woman at the center is almost never the one sitting at the table. Her name was Beulah Frances Childers, and she was born in 1941 in Mercer County, West Virginia, in a house her own grandfather built from timber he cut himself off the hillside behind it. She was the third of 5 children, 2 boys and 3 girls, and she grew up in a house that had a wood stove and a cold porch and a root cellar that her father had dug by hand into the hillside before she was born. She used to say that house taught her 2 things: that cold was manageable if you were prepared for it, and that nothing you did not do yourself was going to get done. She moved to Harlan County, Kentucky when she was 19 years old to marry my grandfather Thomas Childers, and she never once in her life described that as a sacrifice or an adventure or anything other than just what happened next. That was how she talked about most things, just what happened next. Like life was a road and you walked it, and you did not spend a lot of energy deciding whether the road was fair to you or not. She raised 4 children in a house on Sawmill Road outside of Loyal, Kentucky. White clapboard covered porch that ran the full length of the front, a tin roof that sounded different in rain than in sleet and different again in hail, which I know because I slept under it enough times as a child to learn those sounds in my body. She had a garden in the back that she kept going until she was 81 years old when her heart started making the bending and the carrying too hard. She grew tomatoes and pole beans and summer squash and cucumbers and a row of zinnias along the back fence that she said were just for looking at, which was the closest she ever came to decorating. She canned everything that could be canned. She gave most of it away to neighbors, to people from her church, to anyone who came by looking thin. She kept a ledger in the kitchen drawer, a green cardboard-covered composition book that listed what she put up each year. And for 42 years, she wrote the same things in the same order, same handwriting, same ink, same quiet column of dates. Beans, tomatoes, corn, bread and butter pickles, apple butter, the occasional batch of pepper jelly if the peppers came in strong enough to bother with. My grandfather Thomas died of a stroke in June of 1998. He had been working on the truck in the driveway, and my grandmother had brought him out a glass of iced tea and found him sitting on the ground with his back against the front tire, eyes closed, like he had sat down to rest and just not opened them again. She called the ambulance, and then she called her sister, and then she went back out and sat beside him on the ground and held his hand until they came, because she said she was not going to let him be alone out there. That was how she was. After he died, she kept the ledger going. She did not skip a year. I am the oldest grandchild. There are 11 of us total, spread across my father's branch and his 2 sisters' branches. My father is Gerald Childers, the only son, and I will tell you right now that being the only son in that generation meant something specific in our family. It meant my grandmother deferred to him in certain ways I noticed and filed away for years without having the words for what I was watching. When decisions got made about the property, about the house, about anything that involved money or land or what happened next, my father was the one who got called first. Not because he was the oldest, Aunt Darla is 3 years his senior and always has been, but because he was the son, the name carrier, the one who was understood without anyone saying it out loud to be the natural heir to whatever there was to inherit. My grandmother did not seem to fight that structure, she operated inside it. She let my father feel like he was the one in charge, let him sit at the head of the table at Christmas dinner, let him think he was the one who made the decisions about repairs and maintenance on the house. And all the while she was doing something else entirely quietly in an attorney's office on US 119 in Harlan, Kentucky, that none of them knew about. I grew up 20 minutes from her house in a neighborhood outside of Corbin called Pine Ridge in a brick ranch house my parents bought in 1992. Every summer from the time I was 5 until I left for college at 18, I spent time at Grandma Beulah's. Sometimes a week, sometimes two, sometimes my parents would drop me off at the beginning of July and not come back for 3 weeks, and my grandmother would not call them about it. She would just keep me. She fed me and put me to work in the garden and let me run around in the yard until the lightning bugs came out at night. And in the evenings, we would sit on the porch and shell beans into the same big aluminum colander she had been using since the 1970s, the one with the little dent on the left side from some accident she never explained, and she would talk. Not stories exactly, observations she had been collecting for a long time and had not found the right audience for. She told me about the time a neighbor of hers, a man named Hadley Brock who was not related to the Clem Brock she knew later, had tried to sell a parcel of land that did not legally belong to him because the deed was in his wife's name and he had not thought anyone would check. She told me about a cousin of hers who signed a document at a family gathering without reading it and lost the use of 3 acres of bottom land for 15 years because it turned out to be a lease agreement, not a permission slip. She told me about her own mother and the quilt, but I will get to that. She told me these things the way she told me everything, plainly, without drama, looking out at the yard or at the garden or at whatever was in front of her, and I understood even as a child that she was not just telling me stories. She was handing me tools. She was saying, here is what the world is like. Here is what people do when they think you're not watching. Here is what happens when you do not know where your papers are. I was 9, 10, 11 years old, and I understood this the way you understand things from people you trust completely, not because you can articulate the lesson, but because it lands in you and stays. She had an oak dropleaf table in the kitchen that had been her own mother's. It was a sturdy, plain table, nothing ornate about it, the kind of furniture that was made to be used and not admired. It had leaves that folded down on both sides so that it could sit against the wall if you needed the space, and when both leaves were up, it could seat 6 people easily. The finish was dark and worn in the places where people had sat for decades, lighter in the middle where it had been wiped and wiped and wiped again. There was a scratch along the left leaf that ran about 5 inches, diagonal, deep enough to catch your fingernail in it. My grandmother said it came from the day they moved it into the house in 1959 when one of the legs caught on the door frame as they were bringing it through and the corner of another piece of furniture scraped across the leaf. She never had it repaired. She said it was part of the table now. That table is the thing I think of when I think of her. Not her face, though I have that. Not her voice, though I have that too, the flat, patient sound of it, the way she said things once and did not repeat them. I think of the table, the way it sat in that kitchen like it had always been there and always would be, solid and plain and useful, with that one long scratch on the left leaf that told you something had happened once and the table had survived it. My father and my mother, whose name is Sandra, have lived in Corbin their whole lives. My father worked 30 years for a regional distribution company based out of London, Kentucky, driving a delivery route that covered Bell County, Knox County, Laurel County, and parts of 3 others. He retired in January of 2019 with a pension of about $2,300 a month and a gold watch that he keeps in the drawer of his nightstand and does not wear. My mother worked the front desk at a medical group in Corbin for 22 years, answering phones and managing schedules and knowing everything about everyone who came through there, which she took seriously as both a responsibility and a source of information. They are not bad people. I want to be clear about that because it matters for everything I am about to tell you. They are not villains. They are people who believed certain things for so long and so completely that those beliefs had calcified into something they could no longer see past. They believed that family money and family land stayed in the main line. They believed that my father, as the only son, was the natural steward of whatever his mother left behind. They believed that my grandmother's wishes would align with their assumptions because those assumptions had been, in their experience, correct before. They had not been paying close enough attention to the ways in which they were wrong about that. I should tell you about the quilt and about the Mercer County Fair because the roots of this story go back further than the will. My grandmother had a cousin named Vesta who had moved back to Mercer County when she married, and every few years when I was a child, my grandmother would take me with her when she drove over to visit Vesta in late July. We would stay a night or two and we would go to the county fair, which was held on the fairgrounds outside of Princeton, West Virginia, every summer in the last week of July. I loved it the way children love county fairs, purely and completely the smell of funnel cake and sawdust and hot machinery and livestock, the sound of the rides and the carnival games, the way the lights came on at dusk and made everything look like the beginning of something good. My grandmother would give me $5, which in the early 1990s was enough for a few things, and I would spend the whole afternoon deciding how to use it. I almost always saved most of it and spent it at the end on a bag of roasted peanuts from the old man with the pushcart by the 4-H barn, still warm, still in the shell. The salt soaked all the way into the skin of them. One year, I think I was 10, maybe 10 and a half, we were walking through the exhibit hall after looking at the livestock and we came to the quilt display. The competition quilts were hung on wooden frames along one side of the hall, tagged with the makers' names and the pattern names and the judges' ribbons. I do not remember most of them. I remember my grandmother stopping in front of one and standing there longer than she had stood in front of any of the others. It was a double wedding ring pattern. Blue and cream, hand-quilted in a small, even stitch that I would not have been able to appreciate at 10, but that I can look back on now and understand was extraordinary work. It was old, worn soft in places, the kind of quilt that had been used and washed and used and washed until the fabric had that particular look of something that has been loved for a long time. Someone had entered it in the antique category. My grandmother looked at it for a long time without saying anything. I waited beside her. I had learned early that you waited with her, that she would talk when she was ready. Then she said, without looking at me, that her mother had made a quilt like that one, a double wedding ring in blue and cream. She said it had been promised to her when her mother passed. That was the word she used, promised. She said her brother had taken it instead, had not asked, had not discussed it, had just taken it and put it in his house, and that was that. She said he told their sisters that they had gotten enough. He said he was keeping it because he was the one who would carry on the family name, and the quilt should stay with the name. I did not say anything. I was 10 and I did not know what to say. She said that for a long time after, she thought she had done something wrong, that she had not been clear enough about wanting it, that maybe she had not asked the right way or at the right time or in front of the right people. She said she went over it in her mind many times trying to figure out what she could have done differently. Then she said she got older and she understood that she had not done a single thing wrong, that it had never been about what she did or did not do, that some people in families decide what they are going to take and then construct the justification afterward, and no amount of asking correctly or timing it right was going to change that particular kind of person. We walked away from the quilt display. She bought me my peanuts. We did not talk about it again that day. But I thought about it for years. I still think about it. I think about the particular expression on her face when she looked at that quilt, not grief exactly, not anger, something quieter and more settled than either of those, something that looked like a woman who had put something down a long time ago and made her peace with it but had not forgotten the weight of it. I was 26 when I got my real estate appraiser license through the state of Kentucky. I had got my bachelor's degree in business from Eastern Kentucky University in 2010 and worked for 4 years in property management in Richmond before I moved to Lexington and started working toward the appraiser certification. The firm I work for, Whitfield and Associates on New Circle Road in Lexington, has 12 appraisers and a reputation in the region for being thorough and reliable. I have been there since 2015. I know what land is worth. I know how to read a legal description. I know what a deed looks like and where to find the information buried in it and what that information means. My grandmother knew that about me. She chose me accordingly. She was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in March of 2021. She was 80 years old. The cardiologist who first saw her, Dr. Patel at Harlan ARH Hospital, told her and my father and Aunt Darla, who had driven up from Middlesbrough for the appointment, that with medication and some lifestyle adjustments she could manage it comfortably for years, that this was not a death sentence, that plenty of people lived 10 years past a diagnosis like this one and had a good quality of life. My grandmother listened to this with the same expression she used for most things, attentive, neutral processing. She asked about her garden. Dr. Patel said she should avoid the heavy work, but that being outdoors and staying active was good for her. She said she could manage that. She managed the condition for 2.5 years. She died at home in the house on Sawmill Road on a Tuesday morning in October of 2023, which was how she would have wanted it. She had told me once that she did not want to die in a hospital room, that she wanted to die somewhere she recognized, somewhere that smelled like her own house, and she got that. Her neighbor Clem Brock's wife, Anita, was with her. I got the call around 9 in the morning from Aunt Darla, who had gotten it from Anita. I was at my desk at Whitfield and Associates, and I sat very still for a moment after I hung up, and then I drove home and I sat in my own kitchen for about 2 hours before I could think about what to do next. What I did not know at the time of her diagnosis was that in the months after she found out about her heart, my grandmother had made an appointment with a probate attorney in Harlan. She had made that appointment on her own, driven herself there. In her 2009 Buick LeSabre, which she still drove with total confidence and zero hesitation at 80 years old, and she had sat down with a man named David Combs and told him what she wanted to do. David Combs has a practice on US 119 in Harlan, in a low brick building that used to be a dentist's office before the dentist retired in 2014. There is a small sign by the door that says Law Office of David W. Combs, and below it a second sign that says by appointment. The reception area has two chairs and a small table with a succulent plant on it that is clearly thriving, which I mention only because the rest of the building looks like a man who does not spend much time on appearances, and the healthy plant was a small surprise. He is in his mid-60s, plain-spoken, wears reading glasses that sit at the end of his nose, and has handled estates in Harlan County for 30-some years. He is not flashy. He is exactly the kind of attorney my grandmother would choose, someone who was thorough and quiet and had no interest in drama. My grandmother drove herself to her first appointment with him and to the next one. She did not tell my father she was doing this. She did not tell my aunts. She did not tell me until months later. She told him what she had, what she wanted to do with it, and why, and he prepared the documents accordingly. He told me later at the reading that she had been one of the clearest and most deliberate clients he had ever worked with. He said she knew exactly what she owned, exactly what it was worth, and exactly who she wanted to have it. She came to me on the porch in September of 2023, about 6 weeks before she died, and she told me that the table was mine. Just said it out of nowhere, the way she said things, like she had decided it was time for me to know. We were sitting in the late afternoon sun, the air just starting to have that first edge of fall in it, the kind of day in eastern Kentucky where the light comes down at a certain angle through the yellowing leaves and everything looks lit from the inside. She said the oak dropleaf table was going to me. She said she had already arranged it. She said she wanted me to put it in my kitchen and use it every day. I said okay. She said good. We sat there for a while longer without talking. She had a glass of sweet tea in her hand and she was looking at the garden and I was looking at the garden too, at the row of zinnias along the back fence, still orange and red and gold even in late September. Then she said she had done some things to make sure I was going to be all right. I said I knew she always took care of things. She said this was different from that. I looked at her, she was looking at the zinnias. I said okay. She said good again. That was all. She died 6 weeks later. I have turned that conversation over in my hands probably 1,000 times since. The way she said it was different from that, not dramatic, not significant, just a statement of fact, a woman who was giving me information she wanted me to have before she could not give it anymore. I think about the things she chose to say and the things she chose not to say. I think she was precise about both. The will reading was on a Friday morning, 11 days after the funeral. My father called me on the Wednesday before and told me about it, gave me the time and the address, and sounded the way he always sounds when he has been appointed to do something careful and a little important, managing the situation. He had already, I knew, been at the house on Sawmill Road twice since the funeral, going through things with my mother. I had not been asked to come for those visits. I had not expected to be. I drove up to Harlan on Thursday and stayed at the Holiday Inn Express on Cumberland Gap Parkway, room 114, which smelled like industrial cleaner and had a window that looked out on the parking lot. I ate a sandwich from the Subway across the road and I sat on the bed with my shoes on and I looked at the television without turning it on. I knew something was in the will that was not expected. I knew it because of what she had said on the porch. I did not know what it was, but I knew my grandmother well enough to know that when she said something was different, she meant it specifically and not just in the general sense that everything is different when someone dies and there is a will. The reading was at 9 in the morning. David Combs's conference room had a rectangular table that seated 8 beige walls, a window that looked out on the parking lot of a Dollar General. My father was there when I arrived, already seated with my mother beside him. Aunt Darla was there and Aunt June, who had driven from Pineville. I was the last in. My father had left a chair at the end of the table near the door and I sat in it, which placed me across the length of the table from him. David Combs came in with a manila folder and sat at the head of the table opposite me. He had his reading glasses on. He said good morning, said he appreciated everyone making the time, and opened the folder. He read through the first 4 pages. They covered what you would expect. The house on Sawmill Road and the 2.4-acre parcel it sat on went to my father, with a life estate clause for Aunt Darla giving her the right to live there as long as she remained in Harlan County, which was something Aunt Darla had not expected and which registered on her face for just a moment before she went neutral again. The Buick LeSabre went to Aunt June. The contents of a savings account at First National Bank in Harlan, which held approximately $41,000, was divided equally among the four surviving children, $10,250 each. The contents of the house were handled by a handwritten attachment that my grandmother had prepared herself, item by item, each one named and each recipient named. The kind of list that takes years to compose because it requires knowing what you have and who should have it and being certain enough of both to write it down in your own hand and sign it. My mother reached over when that section was done and put her hand on my father's forearm, a small settling gesture. Everything is going the way we expected it to go. David Combs turned a page. There was a section, the fifth section of the will, that covered what my grandmother called the mineral rights parcel. I had never heard those words in connection with my grandmother before. I do not think anyone else in that room had either, except David Combs. He explained it. In 1987, there had been a significant wave of coal company landmen going door to door in Harlan County buying up subsurface mineral rights. It was common practice in Appalachian coal country and had been since the early 20th century. A lot of families sold. My grandmother had sold a portion of the rights she held under the original Childers property but had retained others, specifically a 47-acre subsurface parcel in the northeastern section of Harlan County that was on record at the county courthouse and had been in her name for 36 years. She had paid the small annual property tax on it herself every year. It was not a secret in any legal sense. It was simply something she had never discussed. The parcel had been assessed in 2022. The assessed value at that time was $218,000. David Combs said it was bequeathed in its entirety to Loretta Me Childers. He said my name. My mother's hand came off my father's arm. I did not look at either of them. I looked at David Combs, who had moved on to the next paragraph, who was reading in the same measured voice he had used for all of it. I was aware that my hands were in my lap and I kept them there. Something had shifted in the room, some pressure in the air, and I sat very still and let it settle. There was a note, David Combs said, in parentheses in my grandmother's handwriting that accompanied this bequest. He read it. She knows how to read a document before she signs it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Aunt Darla looked at me, not a smile, not quite, a look that held a great deal of information that neither of us was going to put into words. A look that said she had known Beulah Frances Childers for 60 years and this was exactly the kind of thing she would do, and she was not surprised and she thought it was right. My father's face, I keep coming back to my father's face. He had an expression for about 5 seconds that was simply neutral, the same careful neutral he had worn for most of the reading, and then something moved through it, starting around his eyes and moving down, a tightening, a pulling in, and he looked at the table in front of him. He looked at his own hands on the table. He did not look at me. David Combs finished the reading. There were 2 more pages, procedural and specific, covering executor duties and timelines and a few small bequests. He left $500 to the Loyal Baptist Church for the upkeep of the cemetery plot where my grandfather was buried. He left the garden tools and the lawn equipment to Clem Brock, the neighbor who had been helping her with the heavy outdoor work for the last 3 years, with a note that said he was the one who knew where everything went and how everything worked. He left a cedar chest in the bedroom closet to Aunt June specifically, not the contents of the closet generally, that specific chest, which June later told me had their mother's name carved inside the lid. David Combs asked if there were questions. My father said yes, he had some questions. He asked about the mineral rights parcel, whether it had been independently verified, whether the valuation was current, whether there were any encumbrances on it. David Combs said the parcel was clean, the title was clear, it had been verified as part of the estate inventory, and the 2022 assessment was the most recent on record. My father asked whether a will provision could be contested if there were questions about the testator's capacity at the time of drafting. David Combs said a contest was always possible and that any interested party could bring one, but that the will had been prepared carefully and witnessed by 2 unrelated parties and notarized, and that in his professional opinion it would be very difficult to challenge successfully. He said this without any particular emphasis. He was answering the question that had been asked of him. He was not warning or threatening anyone. He was just a man in reading glasses being accurate. My father said he would need some time to review the document. David Combs said that was certainly his right. He gave each of us a copy of the complete will in a sealed manila envelope. He stood up. The meeting was over. In the parking lot, the air was cold and bright and smelled like fall, that particular October smell of leaves and cold earth that I have always associated with coming home to this part of the state. My mother said something about needing to get the heat checked at the house on Sawmill Road before winter. My father said he would take care of it. They were speaking to each other and not to me, standing by their car, and I unlocked my own car and got in. My father knocked on my window. I rolled it down. He asked if I would come out to Sawmill Road in the morning, said he and my mother wanted to sit down and talk things through calmly like adults. He said that word calmly, which I noted. I said I would come. That night in the hotel room, I called Renata Boswell. Renata is an attorney in Lexington. I had used her 2 years before for a real estate transaction involving a property purchase in Fayette County that had some title complications, and she had been thorough and direct and had not wasted my time. I found her number and I called her at 8 in the evening, which I was a little worried was too late, but she answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. All of it, start to finish, the will and the note in parentheses and my father's question about testamentary capacity and the meeting tomorrow. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do not sign anything tomorrow." She said it once plainly, the way you say something you do not expect to need to repeat. Then she told me what I needed to know. She told me that the will, as I had described it, was valid and intentional and specific, and that the note in parentheses, while not legally operative in itself, was exactly the kind of evidence of testamentary intent that made capacity challenges very difficult, because it demonstrated specific recall of a specific characteristic of a specific person. She said a challenge would require showing that my grandmother did not understand the nature and extent of her property, did not understand who her natural heirs were, and did not understand the contents of the document she was signing. She said a woman who wrote a parenthetical that said she knows how to read a document before she signs it was demonstrating at the moment of signing that she knew exactly who she was giving things to and why. She said, "Come see me Monday." I said I would. I lay on the hotel bed with my coat still on and I looked at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about my grandmother driving herself to David Combs's office on US 119 in her 2009 Buick and sitting down and saying, "Here is what I have and here is where I want it to go." I thought about her writing that note in her own handwriting in the parentheses. I thought about the porch in September, the late afternoon light, the zinnias. She told me it was different from that, and it was. I did not sleep much. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of October morning that makes you feel like you are at the edge of something, and I drove out Sawmill Road with the heater on and the radio off. The house looked the same as it always had, white clapboard, covered porch, the pecan trees in the side yard still holding the last of their leaves, yellow and brown in the gray morning light. My grandmother's Buick was still in the gravel driveway. Aunt June had not come to get it yet. The garden in back was put away for the year, cut back and turned over, just bare ground and the dried stalks of the zinnias still standing along the fence like they were holding their place for spring. I sat in my car for a minute. I was thinking about something my grandmother told me when I was 11 or 12 years old, sitting on the same porch shelling beans. She told me that the difference between a person who keeps what is theirs and a person who does not is almost never about money or about law. She said it is almost always about whether that person is willing to sit still and wait while someone else creates urgency. She said urgency is a tool that people use when they do not have the time they need you to believe they have. She said whenever someone tells you there is not enough time to think, that is the moment when you have exactly as much time as you need. I got out of the car and went inside. They were at the kitchen table. My grandmother's kitchen table, the oak dropleaf, both leaves up, coffee cups, and a plate of store-bought shortbread cookies at the center. My father had the manila envelope in front of him and the will was out of it, open on the table. He had been reading it again. He had a yellow legal pad beside him with writing on it, notes he had made that morning or the night before. My mother had folded her hands in front of her coffee cup. I sat down. My mother said she was glad I had come, that she hoped we could talk about this like a family. I said I was happy to talk. My father said the situation with the mineral rights parcel had come as a surprise to everyone, and he appreciated that and he wanted to approach it reasonably. He was using his reasonable voice, the one he uses when he has already decided how things are going to go and is giving you the opportunity to arrive there without conflict. He tapped his pen against the legal pad just once, looking at the window at the pecan trees that were his now. He said he had been thinking about it, and he believed there were some questions about the will that deserved to be looked at more carefully, given his mother's age and her health over the past 2 years. I looked at the plate of shortbread cookies. They were the ones that come in a blue tin, the kind you buy at Walmart near the holidays. My grandmother had not bought cookies at Walmart. My grandmother made her own cookies, oatmeal raisin mostly, from a recipe that had been in her head since before I was born. Somebody had brought those cookies. I thought my grandmother spent 42 years keeping a canning ledger in that kitchen drawer, and these cookies came from a blue tin and are sitting on her kitchen table. And that was the closest I came to feeling something I could not contain. I looked up at my father. I said I had a great deal of respect for Grandma. Beulah and I believed the will reflected exactly what she intended. He said he understood that was how I saw it, but that sometimes when people were older and not in the best of health, they made decisions that did not fully represent their wishes when they were in full command of themselves. I thought she put your name in there, Dad. She wrote it herself in her own handwriting in the parentheses. She was not confused, she was precise. I said nothing. My mother said she was sure I could see that the mineral rights parcel felt like family property, that it had been in the Childers family for decades, and that it was hard for them to understand why Beulah would have wanted it to leave the direct family line. I said I was a Childers. I said my name was Loretta Me Childers, and it had been since I was born and I was in the direct family line. My mother looked at her coffee. There was a short silence, and my father did not fill it, which was unusual for him. He flipped to a page in the legal pad, and I could see upside down that he had written a name and phone number at the top of it. An attorney in Barberville, I thought, though I could not read it clearly. He said he had spoken to someone who knew about these things, and that there might be grounds to raise questions given his mother's cardiac condition and her age at the time the most recent version of the will was prepared. Something in the center of my chest went very cold and very still, not fear exactly, the opposite of fear. A kind of clarity, the particular clarity that comes when you understand something that you had hoped would not be true. I said I hoped it would not come to that. He picked up the pen and he put it down again, and then he slid the piece of paper toward me. It was one page, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper, printed out and signed by him and my mother. It stated that I agreed to relinquish my interest in the mineral rights parcel, effective upon signing, in exchange for confirmation of the personal property items designated to me in Section 4 of the will, specifically the oak dropleaf kitchen table and 3 other small items that had already been set aside for me. He had also included a sentence that said I acknowledged receiving fair and adequate consideration. I read the whole thing. It took about 45 seconds. I looked at the pen that was still where he had put it, capped end toward me. I did not pick it. I said I wanted a few days to look at this and talk to some people before I made any decisions. My father said there were estate administration timelines and tax considerations, and that the sooner this was resolved, the better for the whole family. I said I understood that, and I still needed a few days. My mother said she hoped I was not going to make this harder than it had to be. I picked up my coffee cup. I held it in both hands. I said I was not trying to make anything hard. I said I was trying to make sure I understood everything fully before I put my name on anything. I said that seemed like the right thing to do. I said I believed that was what Grandma Beulah would have done. Nobody said anything. My father looked at his legal pad. My mother started to say something. I saw her take a small breath, and then she did not say it. The shortbread cookies sat on the plate in the center of the table, and nobody touched them. I set the coffee cup down. I said I would be in touch by Thursday. I stood up. I did not look at the paper with the pen beside it as I walked past it. I went out through the front door and down the porch steps and across the gravel to my car. I looked back once at the house, the window over the kitchen sink. In the glass, I could see the distorted shapes of my parents still at the table, neither of them moving. I drove back toward Lexington. About 30 miles out of Harlan on US 119, I pulled into a gas station outside of Pineville and sat in the car. I was not upset in the way you might think. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. The feeling I had was something more like the feeling of watching a piece of machinery that you understand moving in a direction you had predicted and being neither surprised nor relieved by the confirmation, just clear. I thought about the 47 acres of subsurface parcel. I thought about my grandmother paying the property tax on it herself every year for 36 years, quietly out of her own account, never mentioning it. I thought about her sitting across from David Combs and telling him what she wanted and why, and I thought about her writing that parenthetical in her own handwriting. She chose me because I would read it. She chose me because she knew I would not be rushed. I bought a cup of coffee from the gas station and I drove the rest of the way home. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something because I think about this part of the story often. I think about what it means to sit across a table from someone who loves you and watch them decide in real time that your agreement is a formality, that you will go along because you always have gone along, that you are the quiet one, the easy one, the one who keeps the peace, and therefore the one who can be relied upon to sign. Have you ever been in a room like that? Have you ever had someone in your family assume that you would hand something over not because they had a right to it, but simply because they had always assumed it? Have you ever had the experience of someone treating your patience like weakness, your quietness like emptiness, your good manners like a thing they owned? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time because what happens next is the part I've been building toward this whole time. I went to see Renata Boswell on Monday morning in Lexington. Her office is on East Main Street, third floor, in a building that has a coffee shop on the ground floor. I bought a medium dark roast before I went up and I held it in both hands for most of the conversation because the morning was cold and I had not slept enough again. She had pulled up the Harlan County property records before I arrived. She had the parcel on her screen when I walked in and she turned the monitor so I could see it. The legal description, the acreage, the assessed value from 2022, my grandmother's name in the owner field. She went through the will paragraph by paragraph, the copy I had brought with me. She showed me the sections that governed any challenge, the burden of proof required for a testamentary incapacity claim, the timeline for filing, the specific documentation that would be needed. She told me that Dr. Patel's medical records from his treatment of my grandmother would be a key piece of evidence in any challenge because they would show the cardiologist's assessments of her cognitive status at every appointment. I asked if she thought my father was likely to actually file. She said in her experience, when people were told the cost of a challenge versus the likely outcome, they often reconsidered. She said she would be ready either way. I had the mineral rights parcel reassessed in November, 31 days after the will reading. The appraiser I hired was a colleague of mine, actually. A woman named Bate Dirksen who works for a firm in Corbin and who has done subsurface valuation work for coal and gas interests in eastern Kentucky for 16 years. She went out to the site with the legal description and the title documents and came back with a number. $244,000. The increase from the 2022 assessment was due in part to renewed exploration interest in that part of Harlan County related to natural gas, not coal, which I had not known about but which Bate told me had been generating significant activity in the past year. She said the parcel had good potential and that depending on what the next 18 months brought it could appreciate further. I did not tell my father about the reassessment. He called me on Thursday, the deadline I had set. I was in my car in the parking garage at my office building eating a sandwich. I let it ring twice before I answered. He asked if I had made a decision. I said I had. I said I was not going to sign the document he had given me. I said I believed my grandmother had made her intentions very clear in the will, that the will had been properly prepared and witnessed, and that I intended to honor what she had asked for. He was quiet for a moment, a specific quiet that I recognized, the quiet of a man recalculating. Then he said he was sorry to hear that and that he had hoped we could resolve this within the family. I said I had too. He said that was unfortunate. I said I was sorry and I was sorry for the shape of things, for what this had already cost and what it was going to cost. Not sorry enough to sign, but sorry in the way you are sorry when something that used to work just does not work anymore and you can see the break clearly but you cannot put it back together from where you're standing. He said he would need some time to figure out how to proceed. I said I understood. We said goodbye and I sat in the parking garage and finished my sandwich. Renata received a letter from my father's attorney in December. The attorney was someone out of Barberville named Corey Witt, and the letter raised the question of testamentary capacity and requested access to certain medical records from Dr. Patel and from Harlan ARH Hospital. Renata replied that David Combs, as executor, had already gathered those records as part of the estate inventory and they were available for review, and that in her professional opinion the records would not support a capacity challenge. They did not support a capacity challenge, they actively contradicted one. Dr. Patel had documented every appointment. He had noted my grandmother's orientation, her recall, her ability to make independent decisions at every single visit. His records for the appointment in March of 2022, the same month she had signed the updated version of the will with David Combs, noted in his own words that the patient was mentally sharp, asked detailed and specific questions about her medication interactions, declined a referral to a cardiologist in Knoxville on the grounds that she did not see the value in driving 2 hours when she had adequate care in Harlan, and demonstrated full understanding of her diagnosis and her treatment plan. There was a sentence in his notes from that visit that I read 3 times when Renata showed it to me. Patient is one of the more medically self-aware people I treat. She knows exactly what she has and what she is doing about it. She knows exactly what she has and what she is doing about it. I thought about that sentence for a long time. In February, Renata received a second letter from Corey Witt. It was short. It said his client was withdrawing any potential challenge to the will and wished to cooperate with the estate administration going forward. Renata called me when she got it. She read it to me over the phone, and when she finished, she said he blinked. I said I know. She said she would contact David Combs to coordinate the final steps. I sat at my kitchen table after I hung up, the oak dropleaf table, the one with the scratch on the left leaf. It had arrived at my apartment in December, transported by a moving company out of Harlan in a van, just the table wrapped in 3 layers of moving blankets. I had unwrapped it myself, folding each blanket as I lifted it away, the way you fold something that belongs to someone else. It was heavier than I expected, the way solid old things always are. I had set it against the east wall of my kitchen, both leaves up, and it fit the room the way I had known it would. Not because I had measured, but because some things are right. I ran my fingers along the scratch on the left leaf. Just once, the way she must have run her fingers along it 10,000 times. The mineral rights parcel transferred into my name in March. I drove up to Harlan to sign the documents in David Combs's office. He shook my hand after, which was not something he had done before, and said my grandmother had been one of the most purposeful women he had ever worked with and that he was glad things had come out the way she intended. I thanked him for taking care of her. On the drive home, I stopped at the Hardee's in Barberville and got a coffee and sat in the parking lot for a while. It was a cold, clear March afternoon, the trees just barely starting to get that thin haze of green that means spring is actually coming and not just pretending. I sat there and drank my coffee and did not think about anything in particular for about 15 minutes. My parents and I have spoken since then. Not often, but we have spoken. Thanksgiving, my mother's birthday in April, a phone call about a cousin's graduation, a call in August from my father that was about nothing in particular, just checking in, he said. We talked about my work, about his retirement, about the weather, which had been bad that year. We did not talk about the will, we did not talk about the table. We did not talk about the mineral rights parcel, or the note in the parentheses, or the morning at the kitchen table with the uncapped pen. I do not know if we ever will. That is something I have made my peace with, or am in the process of making peace with, which is a different thing. Aunt Darla called me in the spring, a few weeks after the transfer was finalized. She is not a woman who calls to chat, she is a woman who calls when she has something to say, and she got to it quickly. She said she had not been surprised by what was in the will. She said Beulah had always been that way, deliberate, methodical, slow to make a decision, and then absolutely firm once she had made it. She said she had known for years that I was the one Beulah talked to like an equal, the one she gave the real things to, not the trinkets but the actual information. She said she wanted me to know that my grandmother had told her something once, years ago, at a Sunday dinner, in reference to a situation within another family that Aunt Darla did not specify. She said my grandmother had said that the problem with people who take things without asking is that they never understand what they have taken. She said she wanted me to have that. I said I was glad to have it. We talked a few minutes more about her garden. She had switched tomato varieties after 4 decades because the old variety had gotten harder to find, and then we said goodbye. I think about that sentence often. The problem with people who take things without asking is that they never understand what they have taken. I think my grandmother had been sitting with that idea since before I was born, since the quilt, since her brother said he was keeping it because he carried the name. I think she understood something fundamental about the difference between holding something because it was handed to you and holding something because you chose it and prepared for it and were ready when it came. She chose me because I was the one who would read the document. Because she had been handing me tools since I was 5 years old, sitting on that porch, listening to her tell me about Hadley Brock who tried to sell land that was not his and the cousin who signed something at a family gathering because it was moving too fast for her to think. Because she had watched me for 30 years and she knew what I was. The mineral rights parcel has not produced income yet. There are active conversations happening about natural gas leasing in that part of the county, and I am watching them carefully, consulting with Bate Dirksen, being patient. It may produce returns in the next year or two, or it may not for longer than that. The value has not changed. It is mine either way, and it will be mine until I decide otherwise. My grandmother's canning ledger is on my kitchen counter next to the stove. It is the green composition book, 42 years of the same things written in the same order in the same careful handwriting. Beans, tomatoes, corn, bread and butter pickles, apple butter, pepper jelly in the good years. The last entry is from August of 2023. She had put up 14 quarts of green beans and 9 pints of tomatoes and 6 jars of bread and butter pickles that summer, her last summer, 2 months before she died. She wrote it down the same as always. Same handwriting, same pen, same careful column of dates. I made my first batch of bread and butter pickles last July. They did not turn out as good as hers. The brine was a little too sweet, but they were close enough that when I opened the first jar, I had to set it on the counter and stand there for a minute before I could do anything else. I have been keeping my own ledger, a new composition book, green, from the same brand. I do not know why green exactly, it just seemed right. It is August now, almost fall, and the light in my kitchen in the mornings comes in low from the east and hits the surface of the oak table and lights up every grain in the old dark wood. I drink my coffee there every morning. I set the cup on the same worn spot at the left edge where the finish has been rubbed thin by decades of cups and elbows, and I look at the scratch on the left leaf, and I think about the door frame in 1959 and the table surviving it and the scratch becoming part of the table and that being fine. If you are somewhere right now and there is a piece of paper in front of you and someone you trust is telling you there is no time to read it, I want you to hear my grandmother's voice. The flat, patient voice of a woman who kept a canning ledger for 42 years and drove herself to an attorney's office in her Buick at 80 years old and said, "Here is what I have and here is what I want," and wrote the name of the person she trusted in her own handwriting, and then added in parentheses, just so it was clear, the reason why. Read the whole thing, every page. She was not confused. She was not impaired. She was a woman who had been watching her family for 82 years and had spent the last two of them making sure the right things went to the right person. She knew exactly what she had. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did.